I told him, I said, you know, you're being really evasive with me, and I have a report here. And on this report, it says that you threatened to lock her in a storage room or a cellar underneath the house. I said, that's a storage room over there, and I want to go in there and take a look. I think that you might be holding her in there. In 1996, I was assigned to homicide, and I had taken over the missing persons section. And we, on a daily basis, had numerous missing persons cases, and we had old ones that we used to follow up on. You have to make follow-ups. And so this particular case caught my attention, as many did, but when I made a phone call to the suspect, he wasn't the suspect at the time. He was actually the missing person's boyfriend, and they had a child together. Everything started being suspicious from the time I called him. This was the mother of a woman named Beatrice Tronzak. She actually lived in Poland, and she hadn't heard from her daughter, who had come to the United States to be with their child and to stay with Ramon Rogers and to just, enjoy the company of her child, because she was separated in Poland from the child. And the mother became concerned, and one of the things that caught my attention in the report, it said that the person that she was living with, which was Ramon Rogers, had threatened to lock her in a cellar underneath the house, and I thought that was pretty unusual. And I also thought it was unusual that he never reported her missing. It was reported by the mother. So these were a couple of pretty unusual circumstances.
I was the Crime Stopper coordinator for the San Diego Police Department, but for the entire county as well. And I dealt with agencies within the county as well as agencies outside the county. So our purpose was to help solve crimes over an anonymous tip line. So people could receive reward money anonymously and help us solve crimes. We did this through crime reenactments that were public service announcements. We would always cover felony crimes. Most of them were murders. When I took over the job as the Crime Stopper coordinator, it came with an actor's file, and his name was in the actor's file. And the officer that I took the job over from had pulled his file and said, this Ramon Rogers is someone that you're probably going to want to use a lot because he's very reliable, he's usually available, he's easy to get along with, and overall and he even comes with, if you need props, you can let him know and he'll even bring props, which I later found out he was just borrowing from the renters in the apartment that he was managing.
About 99% of the people that are reported missing return within the first 2 or 3 days. But this person had obviously not returned, and so I figured I was going to make a phone contact with him and see if there was do some kind of a follow-up to see if he had heard anything from her.
So do you recall how that went?
Yeah, well, it didn't go very well. I called him and they said, are you Ramon Rogers? He said, yeah. He says, I want to talk to you about your girlfriend who's missing. He says, yeah, well, I'm busy right now. I'm dropping her son off at school, and I really don't have time to talk to you. And I said, well, I need to talk to you. And he ended up hanging up on me. And I said, well, so this is kind of a little unusual. That combined with the things that I'd read in this report, I said, I'm going to go out and talk to Ramon Rogers. He has got my competitive spirit up, and I think that I need to get a little more information about this case. It was unusual he didn't report it. It was unusual about locking someone in the cellar, and then to be so evasive and not want to talk to me or have no concern about the mother of his child. It you know, kind of got to me. Well, the next thing was I headed out towards his house, and it was actually a large apartment complex in San Diego. When I got there, I went to the location where he lived, and it said that he was the manager. It was the manager's unit. So I knocked on the door, and I didn't get any response. So I knocked on the neighbor's door directly across, and I said, have you seen Ramon Rogers lately? And she says, yeah, she's there. I says, what about a woman that had been living with him? She says, well, she was there, but I haven't seen her for the last few days. And I said, are there any storage units or cellars underneath this apartment complex? She said, yeah, there's a couple of them, but he keeps the key to them, and he doesn't want anybody else to go into them.
Ramon was someone who had a lot of charisma. He was wanting to please. He loved doing the reenactments. And when he was arrested, I heard from the sheriff's department that he had made scrapbooks of our crime reenactments, that he had cut out newspaper clippings of himself as an actor. And he did act for me in several of my reenactments, to the point where one of the viewers called our tip line and said, have you ever noticed that all of your suspects are the same person, committing the same crimes? And I think he didn't realize that it wasn't security footage, but it was actually reenactments that we were doing. So on the way to one of our reenactments with Ramon, Ramon was driving a Jeep, which I later found out that he was stealing. But anyway, that's another story. One of the actresses was in my car, and she and I were headed to the location. And she said to me, Ramon asked me to go out with him, because they had worked in one of my crime reenactments previously and got to know each other a little bit. And Ramon was so cute and so charismatic and handsome. I was excited for her, and I said, you're gonna go, aren't you? And she said, no, I'm not. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, I make it a point of not going out with people I don't know very well, which probably saved her life. Anyway.
It's something vividly that stands out in your mind.
Yes, it really does, because I had always heard that serial killers were charismatic, and he was living proof of that.
So again, my suspicions are going up. So I said, where are these storage rooms? And the lady pointed to the alleyway to the rear of the apartment complex. So I started feeling a little uncomfortable with this whole situation, so I asked for a couple of cover units, patrol officers to cover me, and which they did. And we walked back there together in the back of the apartment complex. Well, I saw a guy working on this car, and I said, are you Ramon Rogers? And he goes, no, but this is his car. It was, I can't remember what it was. I think it was a little BMW or something. And there was a door to a storage unit right behind the car. I went over and said, you Ramon Rogers? And he said, yeah. And I said, you know, I was trying to talk to you about your girlfriend this morning, and you're a little evasive with me. And I said, I wanted to get a little more information about her. And he says, well, I told you she took off to Mexico with somebody. I don't know where she is. And he says, you know, that's all I can tell you. I said, well, this is the mother of your child and stuff, you know. I would think you'd be a little more concerned. And he said, I can't remember his comment to that, but then I told him, I said, you know, you're being really evasive with me, and I have a report here. And on this report, it says that you threatened to lock her in a storage room or a cellar underneath the house. I said, that's a storage room over there, and I want to go in there and take a look. I think that you might be holding her in there. Well, when I said it to him, it was shocking to me, actually. I looked at him, and the flat portion of his throat right here started pulsating like a diaphragm. I thought, I have really struck a nerve here. I've never seen, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I've never seen that much of a reaction to a question that I've asked a person. Immediately, I thought, this guy is hiding something. He's, you know, I've never seen anybody so react to a question like that, where their body actually showed me that they were reacting to the question. And I told him, you know, in my mind, now this further goes towards my mindset. There had been a case in New York where a person had made a cellar, or made a opening in a cellar, covered it with plywood, and held person captive in there. And I truly thought that this man might be keeping this woman locked in this cellar, and that she may be alive and may needed my help. And that's what started to go through my mind.
There were 3 young men walking down the street in Hillcrest, and 2 or 3 men attacked them because they thought they were gay. And I don't know if they were or not, it doesn't really matter, but I guess they were. That's why they have the hate crime law. And so attacked them, and it was a very terrible thing.
At that point, I really felt it was exigent circumstances. So I contacted the homicide unit, and I told them what was going on, and I said, I really feel like I have to go and check this out further. So I go back to him and I says, listen, Ramon, these circumstances are suspicious to me, and I feel that you may have her locked in that cellar and holding her against her will. I want you to give me the key, I want you to open that door, and I want to go in there and check. And he looked at me and he said, I can't let you do that.
I already told you this morning on the phone. She took off somewhere, Mexico. I don't know. She didn't say. I don't have time for this.
You know, you're not being very cooperative. As a matter of fact, you're kind of being a jerk. Said in the report that you threatened to lock her in some sort of storage unit. That is a storage unit. Now, I need the keys to get in there.
I can't let you do that.
What do you mean you can't let me do that? Look, you need to give me the keys, or I'm going to kick the door in myself. You know what? Why don't you have a seat?
I said, if you don't give me the key, I'm going to kick the door in, and I'm going to go in there anyway. Because now I am convinced that you possibly have her in there.
Officer, can you stay here and watch him? We're going to go in that unit and check.
I went with the officers, and we forcibly opened the door. So we searched this room really well, went through it really well. And we did find some narcotic paraphernalia, and we found some personal belongings of hers. So I go back outside, and I said, listen, there's other storage rooms here. And I went through the same process with them. And I said, I want to ask you something. I said, you know, you were a reserve deputy sheriff and all this stuff. I said, this is really suspicious to me. How do you feel? He says, well, it's suspicious to me too.
Well, if someone had asked me if Ramon Rogers was a murderer before I had heard this story from the missing persons detective, I would have had a very difficult time believing it. And I can certainly see how young women can be lured into a relationship with a killer, because there was no indication whatsoever by his personality that he was anything but genuine and warm and friendly and charismatic and helpful. It's not like a person with a strange personality that you wonder about because of their oddness or weirdness. No, not at all. Yes, he was a great actor.
And I says, well, you know, I want the key because I'm going to go in the other storage room and take a look. He says, I can't give it to you. I said, okay. So I walked down there, and one officer stayed with him in the car, and we forcibly opened that door. When we go in there, there's a lot of luggage in this place, a lot. And I mean, I'm talking like, several suitcases, more than 10 or so. And
How big is this?
it's a relatively big storage area. This particular area was about probably 30 feet long, 25 feet wide underneath the complex. And I thought it was really weird that all these suitcases were there. Well, we came across one that said Beatrice Taranzak. And we looked in it and had all of her personal toiletries and clothing and underwear and stuff in there. I thought, this is getting really suspicious.
Right. Nobody leaves home without that.
Right. So we searched this place pretty well looking, didn't find anybody in there. So I went back to him and I said, there's one more storage room. I want the key to that one. And we went through the same thing. No, I'm not going to give it to you. He sat in the patrol car. So we go with the officers down there, and we forcibly opened that door. Well, as the door flew open, it knocked over a metal trash can. It was sitting on a piece of cardboard. In the trash can were a lot of rubber gloves and things that spilled out, and on the floor was a dried puddle of liquid. And in the dirt, it was hard to tell whether or not it was blood, but it appeared to be like dried blood on the ground. And as we looked behind the door, we saw a piece of 4x4 that was painted white, and it was looked like it had been used as a butcher block. There was a handsaw and a hammer and a knife, and there was what appeared to be blood and tissue all over them. And as we looked around on the walls in this place, there appeared to be blood spatter on the walls. And so we could see the entire room. I saw no body in there at that time. So I says, listen, this appears now, I no longer think that she's being held against her will. This appears to be a crime scene to me. Well, from what we had seen with the tools that had blood and tissue on them appearing, the dried blood on the floor and the cardboard and the rubber gloves that looked like they had blood on them, blood spatter on the walls, at this point, to me, as a detective, it looked like a crime scene. And so we backed out of there. I told the officers, come on, we're not going in here. We're not going to search this room any further. I said, we're going to get a search warrant. So at that point, I got a telephonic search warrant. Telephonic search warrant is when it's kind of an emergency situation. You contact the district attorney who puts you in touch with a judge, and you have a conference and you write up a search warrant, and then the judge authorizes you over the telephone to conduct a search of the premises with a warrant.
Okay, so you got a search warrant?
So I got a search warrant. So the homicide team also had come down at that time, and we went in together. As we walked back into the room, one of the detectives looked at me. There was a yellow bucket sitting on some boxes. He looked at me and he goes, we've got fingers and teeth. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, in this bucket. So I went over and looked in the bucket. And in the bucket were fingers from the center knuckle on down, and a lower jawbone, or it appeared to be a lower jawbone to me, with the teeth still affixed and some teeth loosely in the bottom of the bucket.
Human, obviously.
Human, appeared to be human to me, the fingers especially. And the fingers were pink and still looked somewhat normal. The homicide team at that point, they took over for all the evidence collection, the preservation of the body parts that we had, and they took over the crime scene. What was interesting the next day at the autopsy, I mean, the only thing there for the autopsy was the fingers and the jawbone and the teeth. I had seen those fingers as pink and still somewhat normal looking. They had started to decompose and turn color by the next day. So that's how fresh that body was in that place. And those would have been the most identifiable portions of the body.
Because?
Well, for your dental records and fingerprints.
Understood. Okay, so obviously those had been removed.
Yeah, those had been removed probably to be gotten rid of at a different location than the actual body, which was never recovered. And I always had a really big fear in my mind. I was wondering if he had ever said to me, if it was just him and I there, and he said, well, let's go take a look in that storage room, and maybe I would have been in that storage room as well. I always had that thought in the back of my mind.
So it was actually smart for you to ask for additional officers.
I was really happy I did, and after that I made it a point to usually call cover units when we went out on something like that. Well, there was a man by the name, I think Stant, that was missing. That was his friend, and there was also a woman by the name of Rose Albano. Well, the interesting thing was Rose Albano was his girlfriend who was pregnant, and she had been gone missing at least a year before. And they found in Valley Center, I believe it was the Valley Center area, they found a plastic bag with her arm and her leg and I think a portion of her jawbone thrown alongside the road. And it was coincidentally on the only road that's a dirt road that goes to Ramon Rogers' sister's house. The detectives went out and interviewed him, and they couldn't prove that, you know, he had been with her at that time or whatever, and so the case just kind of sat cold.
And then there was another gentleman that had gone missing, is that correct?
Yeah, and this guy was, he had actually been a roommate with Ramon Rogers, but Ramon had actually gotten involved with his wife. I believe they were separated, estranged wife, and the wife had made comments about having trouble with him, and so he decided that I think he at one point told her, well, you won't have any problems anymore. And he ended up being the last person that had a phone contact with him on his cell phone. He was called over to Ramon's house to pick up some either jewelry or property that belonged to his wife. And nobody saw him again after that point. He was, and then Ramon Rogers ended up with some personal items of his and some phone numbers that he would have only been able to get out of a written book or something that this man had with him. He was actually convicted of killing Beatrice Tronzak, Stant, and Rose Albano. Through dental records and stuff, we identified the teeth and the jawbone from a dentist's x-rays as being Beatrice Tronzak. We did have one unusual thing that occurred. When they did the luminol in his car, they had several blood sources inside his Isuzu Trooper. And I think some of that might have come back to her, but then when they removed the door panels, they found 3 more blood sources that didn't come back to any of the victims. I suspect that there are other victims.
Tell us why.
Well, you know, the extra blood that we found inside of the Isuzu Trooper, I mean, with 3 different blood sources that were not tied to any of the victims. I mean, there's some reason for that blood being there. And I guess he was frequently involved with other women, and he had spent some time overseas, and we didn't have any way to follow up on some of those things. I guess there was a lot of contact with women when he was overseas in the military. And I don't know if any of these other cases could ever be proven, but it's just, in my mind, I feel that he had more victims. Well, when I had dealings with him, he appeared to be, solemn, sarcastic, and evasive with me. And we just had, sometimes you meet people and you get along with that person right away. To me, I felt suspicious of his behavior from the moment I first met him, even on the telephone. And it just continued like that. And a lot of people said that he was very congenial with them, that he was an outgoing person and nice to be around, and I never got that feeling from him. Well, I understand he was a reserve deputy sheriff. He was an extra in the movie Silk Stockings, or the TV series Silk Stockings. And he was a diver. That was another thing that was suspicious to me. They were a place where he could have easily gotten rid of bodies, taken them into a water area somewhere. And he owned a window tinting business, and the people seemed to like him pretty much that worked around him. And one interesting thing was one of his employees made a comment, He said, I've been with this guy inside a car in 100-degree weather putting window tint in, and I've never seen him crack a sweat. But he says, when you talk to him, I saw the sweat beads come out on his forehead immediately.
From what I have read and seen about Ted Bundy, he was very similar to Ramon Rogers in that he was so warm and friendly and open, seemingly open, that women would fall into his trap. And this is why young women who are on the dating scene really need to be very careful. And when I had friends that were still single and they were going out with someone that we didn't know, I would ask them, I would say, before you go out with this gentleman, call me and tell me his name and give me his phone number or his address. And if something happens to you tonight, at least we'll know where to start. My girlfriends thought I was crazy when I would tell them that, but they weren't police officers either.
I think he was a prolific killer. And I think if we knew the truth, we would probably find more bodies around. Yeah, after Ramon Rogers was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death, he was on death row, and I guess the Night Stalker Ramirez was in a cell close to him. And in this letter that was intercepted, he apparently said that he had struck up a friendship, and he really looked up to Ramirez and thought he was a great guy. But my main feeling was for these victims. As a homicide detective, I always thought that I was the only advocate as a homicide detective, or a team of us homicide detectives were the only advocate for the person once they're gone. I always had a soft place in my heart for the victims. And that's always what I've thought, is how victims, the horror that they go through the last 30 seconds of their life. And you can never forget a case like this. In most of the cases I've ever worked, you don't forget them, because it created such an amount of sorrow for the victims and the families. And it just kind of sticks with you. But I just feel good that I could be a vehicle to get this guy taken into custody and convicted.
Rick, I want to thank you for sitting down and talking to us today. I mean, it's just an amazing story, and you truly are a hero.
Didn't look at it that way, but
you are.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for what you did.